Today, it is Nicole Sandler in for Randi Rhodes, and we're going to get a little serious here. We are in a ridiculously long war still in Afghanistan, and there are many of us who believe it needs to stop now. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta said something the other day that raised a lot of eyebrows, making a lot of people think that actually we were going to be at least ceasing combat operations sooner than had already been planned. I hope that's what he meant. It seems like Leon Panetta is sometimes as gaffe-prone as is Mitt Romney. But to straighten it all out for us, we're calling on my friend Derrick Crowe. He's the political director of Brave New Foundation, who produced the awesomely, almost depressing but really eye-opening documentary Rethink Afghanistan. Hi, Derrick.
Hi, how are you, Nicole?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Very good.
Good. So what did Leon Panetta say, and what's reality here?
Well, what he said was that the U.S. would be pulling back from combat roles in Afghanistan as early as mid-2013. And that doesn't mean, by the way, what the New York Times has been kind of portraying it as, that our troops would be out of there by then. People have been speculating that it may mean what we did in Iraq, which was pull back to larger bases and get out of the local community's faces a bit, with that being the precursor to a larger pullout to happen later. And so that is really at least a step in the right direction for those of us that think that the war needs to end sooner rather than later. It shows that the 63% of Americans who oppose the war and the 58% who want troops out ASAP are getting through to the power holders, and that we're having an effect. It also means that we have to turn up the pressure now and keep it on so that we actually get to the point where our troops come home.
Boy, no kidding. So Leon Panetta was talking. It was before a meeting of NATO defense ministers, and he said this. Now, so what did what he say is that different from what's planned? I mean, if we're still pulling out at the end of 2014. Isn't that about the time that the combat troops should pull back and be in a more training role? Did he say anything that's not according to the plan?
Well, it sees us pulling back from the combat role earlier than what was anticipated.
Oh, really? Okay.
Had been pushed forward a little bit, saying, the last I heard was that the U.S. planned to pull back from that combat role early in 2014 with the idea of having that process, the final quote-unquote phases of transition to Afghan responsibility starting then. And so it doesn't say that we're getting our people out of there anytime sooner, obviously. But when you look at what he's talking about, it's pushing up a little bit the handover of the lead role, at least is the way they put it. Now, that may be also buckling to a little bit of pressure coming from France, because France has had it. They've lost some people to troops that they've trained in Afghanistan, and they want to get their people out much sooner than that. And that caused quite a stir within the NATO alliance. But it does show that, people's voices are getting through. It also shows, if you saw that leaked NATO report that showed that the Taliban don't think they're losing at all and they're ready to jump in and fight as hard as ever, that the U.S. and NATO are starting to see what we've been saying for a while, and that's that a military-first policy was never going to get to what they thought victory was in Afghanistan, like cutting losses. Well,
of course. Again, Derrick Crowe is with us from Brave New Foundation. The whole thing about the Taliban, we never went to war with the Taliban, right? We went, supposedly, we went into Afghanistan because that's where Al-Qaeda hatched, that's where they were based, and that's where they hatched their plans for 9/11. The Taliban was not who we were fighting. Now, all of a sudden, they're our enemy?
Well, it was this constant creep, right? You first saw, okay, Al-Qaeda attacked us, we're going to go get them. Then it was the people who supported and harbored Al-Qaeda, which was Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And then it was the people whose villages we were in who were fighting us because we're there.
Of course.
That's where we got stuck, and that's where we remain today. When in people's villages, who, by the way, in the big swaths of Afghanistan where the insurgency is based, when these groups go in and try to do something like polling and figure out what their attitudes are, almost more than 90% had no idea what 9/11 was, because most people can't read or count in the areas that this polling was done. And that is stunning to people who are trying to do hearts and minds work and try to win this section of the country over for the central government. If they don't even understand why U.S. troops are there. But those people are breaking into their homes every night and dragging their sons and their wives out in a really shaming activity, especially in the local culture. You're never going to win the local support, and they're always going to be fighting.
Right. And this is the Taliban, who are just, this is their land. They've been there for, thousands of years. And anybody who comes in there, they're saying, get the hell out of our country. This is our country. The Taliban, the whole thing they were telling us is if we don't fight them over there, they're going to follow us home and kill us here. The Taliban will never follow us home. They don't want to come here.
It was absolutely, and they couldn't. I mean, even if they had a boat to come over here, there's no water around Afghanistan. It's a landlocked mountainous country. So if you can't read or count, you're going to have a really hard time putting together an air force that flies your people over.
You think?
There was never going to be a Taliban invasion of the United States. I mean, it's not that terrorism is not a serious problem that has to be pursued vigorously, but the best tools for doing that are political solutions to local conflicts and law enforcement techniques, and we've known that for years. And people that said that back at the beginning were shouted down as soft or traitors or, all sorts of epithets were thrown at people. But that turns out, through numerous studies and hard-won experience here in Afghanistan, that was always the case, and it's always going to be the case.
Boy, I hear you. And public opinion has really, over the last 10 years, has been shifting on Afghanistan. And people are now saying, enough already. There's no winning here. Yet when we watch these Republican debates, it seems like they want to double down, doesn't it?
Well, when you hear people, even not people who are even in the Republican debates, even just Republicans in the Senate like John McCain, who is sitting there with Lindsey Graham telling people things like the president wants to leave more than he wants to succeed, it just reminds me of people who say if we just sent one more brigade or bombed the hell out of a few more villages in Vietnam that we would have won. I mean, we've been there for 10 years. Staying any longer is losing.
Right. $2
billion a week and 1,700 plus kids killed so far. There's no win there for the United States.
No,
it's going to be conflict management ad infinitum.
Right. There is no win. And, if you listen to some of them, they go back into Iraq as well. It is truly stunning. And the film Rethink Afghanistan, for anybody who is just still not convinced, just watch it. Go to rethinkafghanistan.org. Is it .org or .com? .com.
We're on Facebook as well, and you can find us there.
Okay, great. Now, Derrick Crowe, you are the political director of Brave New Foundation, and Brave New Foundation, of course, is more than Rethink Afghanistan. And the new campaign over there is trying to get a subpoena for the Koch brothers. Because I believe what we know is that they've got a real stake in the Keystone XL pipeline. Gee, shocker that the Republicans are so hell-bent in getting the Keystone XL pipeline approved. Can you tell us what's going on here?
Sure. Well, what we're asking for is if you go to KochBrothersExposed.com, we're asking Representative Waxman, we're telling him that we're insisting that Charles and David Koch answer these fundamental questions about how their company is positioned to catch a windfall from this dangerous, very, very long pipeline that will run right down the middle of America. I mean, the oil that's going to be brought down from that, if it passes, is some of the most toxic, environmentally damaging operations for oil extraction that you can have. And so we need to know what these people who are donating to these committees are getting from the Kochs and what their roles are in influencing. I mean, Ed Whitfield, he's kind of featured in our video that we put together. You can see at that website. He took $15,000 from Koch Industries, and he's part of this agitation to get this pipeline through. And this is just an ongoing effort of ours to show people, to get people thinking about where the money's coming from for these kinds of political activities. I mean, you probably saw the news where those Gasland directors who were doing that documentary were arrested.
Yes.
Trying to film in an open hearing, and by people who get money from fracking operations and things like that. And this is all part of the same thing. We're trying to expose the puppeteers behind the political system involved in campaign donations and lobbying donations. And that's actually something that's also being carried through to our war costs campaign, where we're trying to expose how defense contractors manipulate national policy and get us into situations like the Afghanistan war. So if you go to KochBrothersExposed.com, you can see more about that petition, and you can sign it.
Great. Derrick Crowe, you guys at Brave New Foundation do such wonderful work. And so thank you for explaining what was going on there to us. And the Koch brothers, I tell you, if they just had a conference at a hotel in California, And because last year when they had this conference, too many people leaked information about it, this time they just bought out the entire resort. 500 rooms at $200 a night, so that word wouldn't leak about the fact that they were there.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where these folks are actively involved in very intense political manipulation of our representative form of government here. And we, I feel, have a right to know what's said in those meetings if they're going to be talking about how to basically buy our representatives out from under us. So I think the secrecy that's involved in that sort of operation, and just if you think about the average American could never do something like buy out a whole compound or a whole hotel so that we could have some privacy for our meetings. But that shows you just the tiniest bit of the wealth that they're pouring into efforts to buy our democracy. And it's the same with these defense contractors. I mean, most folks don't know that people like Robert Stevens at Lockheed Martin make more than a Goldman Sachs CEO, and they put that money right back into the political system. So you could see this kind of overarching theme in our work as we're trying to really get people to think about who's buying our democracy out from under us and how to stop it.
Derrick Crowe, so let me ask you one more question along those lines. Your last two tweets, I'm looking on your Twitter feed right now.
No.
Sorry. Most fined, highest settling military aerospace company, no problem, another $1.7 billion for Boeing. And then Raytheon just got a $76 million contract with the Department of Defense. Guess hiring those ex-generals pays off. We don't hear enough about the defense contractors and how much money go to them, do we?
No, we don't hear enough about that at all. And just to talk a little bit about that, what I meant about the ex-generals, Raytheon just hired on a major military leader on their vice president as a board of directors member, actually. And that was announced earlier this week. And it's just stunning to those of us who are watching the revolving door and expecting, naively that the government should be a careful steward of our tax dollars, I guess, that a major company that has major contracts in the hopper with the Department of Defense is allowed to lure these generals who have just retired with, the lure of a big paycheck and a corporate board membership. And these guys are supposed to be making objective decisions about how to spend our money and which companies to go with. And as we point out in various pieces that we put out lately, the lure of a golden parachute when you get out of Pentagon employment really affects the way you interact with these folks. Are you going to be a heavy watchdog and come down on these guys when they are screwing the American taxpayer? If you know that your retirement plan is going to work for one of these guys, it's just outrageous. And when you hear that they've hired this guy, and in the same week, they get a $76 million contract. Now, you can't say that one caused the other, but that sure looks bad in the eyes of people who are just outside observers. And those kinds of things absolutely have to be brought to light.
Boy, I hear you. And as somebody just, sorry about the Twitter, but somebody else just tweeted, Atta's al-Qaeda cell was located in Hamburg, not Afghanistan, so we probably should have invaded Germany.
That's the logic of the Afghanistan campaign, especially the logic of escalating the presence after seeing how little we've gotten for the military presence there, is just completely illogical. And it shows you how companies that have a very vested interest in keeping that money going can manipulate the process in Washington, D.C.
Boy, I hear you. Derrick Crowe, a Brave New Foundation. Keep up the great work, you guys. I appreciate all you do. All right. Thanks so much.